In this video, I'm going to show you how to smoke brisket overnight without using a pellet smoker, without using any attachments, without losing any sleep in a drum smoker. So we're going to get started by trimming and preparing our brisket. I'm going to be using this beautiful Carrara Wagyu brisket. This is a marble score 8 to 9. This one weighs around 8 kilos. I'm just going to take this plastic off. Now the first thing I've done is just remove that top flap. That doesn't really sit too nicely on the brisket. It causes a really uneven shape and it doesn't cook too nicely most of the time. And then I'm just going to flip our brisket over, and there's always a nice pocket of fat along the side here where the point and the flap meet. So I'm just going to spin our brisket around like so, and we're just going to work on taking that out. So I'm just going to take that first sort of top layer off, and then we're going to really be able to see that fat. Now that one isn't really too thick. Sometimes they'll take up sort of this whole side here. It looks like I'm not going to have to trim that one down too much. And then now I'm just going to start working on this bottom. So there's a really big coverage of fat on the bottom here. I just want to trim that down. And as you can see, this is just exposing some beautiful marbling in that meat. So if you can, if it's in your budget, try and get the most well marbled brisket you can afford. Or if you can only get hold of a leaner brisket, then you probably want to be leaving some of this bottom fat on there. Now, I'm not too fussed about these thinner little smaller pockets of fat. I'm happy with that bottom for now. So we'll turn it over. Now before we continue trimming this brisket, I just want to point out the knife I'm using because it's super important to use a good knife when you're trimming brisket. This is no fancy expensive knife. This is just around $30. Victorinox knife. This is from their Fibrox range. I use this brand throughout my whole butchering career. These knives will last a lifetime if you look after them properly. So if there's any beginners out there, or if you're looking to upgrade your knives, definitely check these out. Now we're onto the top side of this brisket. I just want to feel around. This one really doesn't have too much top fat I want to trim down. And again, if you're unsure, always just leave a little bit more on rather than taking more off. Ideally, you want to trim your fat down to around 2 to 3 mil thick. You can afford to trim a little bit harder on the point end as it's got a lot more intramuscular fat. And I'm just trimming in a way that this brisket is going to be a little bit more aerodynamic and even from point to flat. Just around this flat end, this end here is quite thin, so I'm just going to sort of square this up, round it off, because any of these thinner edges are just potentially going to burn. And even this thin edge here, this is around half the thickness of around this section, so I'm just going to square this up as well. It might seem like a bit of a waste, but seriously, those thin edges, they're just going to burn, dry out and overcook. But don't chuck any of your trimming away. That makes the perfect burger mince. And then any fat you can separate out, and then that can be rendered down. Just going to trim down that fat layer a little bit. And then I'll start working on this point end. Now this whole end here is quite fatty. You can just feel it. That's just super thick in fat. So I'm just going to square this end off as well. And as you can see, there's just a lot of fat in there that wouldn't have rendered down. And now I'm on this point end. I'm just trimming it in a way where juices will run off it rather than pooling up in sections. And if you can do that, it's really going to help your bark set nicely all over. I'm just going to turn it back over and double check. Knock a little bit more fat out of here. I reckon this one is all trimmed up and ready to be seasoned now. So before we season our brisket, we're just going to give it a light coat in some yellow mustard. If you don't want to use yellow mustard for whatever reason, you can just use a little bit of olive oil, but I like to use yellow mustard just because when you're seasoning the brisket, the yellow coming through will sort of let you know where you haven't seasoned or missed any spots. So just a nice light coat all over, and then I'm just going to be using some of my steak shooter and beef bounce. We'll go down with my steak shooter first, just because that's the finer rub, and then we'll top it off with some beef bounce, and that'll give us some really nice bark. And then I'm just going to get this brisket on a tray, and then that'll go in the fridge until we're ready to get it out and smoke it a bit later on when we come back to set our smoker up. All right, so we're ready to set our smoker up. So we're going to open our lid, take our cooking grate off, we'll remove our heat deflector, then we'll fill our charcoal basket up with either lump charcoal or briquettes. And then we'll bury a firelighter in there and light it up. Now this is the Bronco Pro, so this has a larger charcoal basket. I've just fit 8 kilos of briquettes in there, and we should easily get 16 hours plus burn time out of that. And now our briquettes are burning nicely. We'll shut our lid and open up both of our vents, and then we're going to let our smoker come up to around 225 Fahrenheit or 108 Celsius, which will take around 10 to 15 minutes. All right, now we're up to temperature. We'll open our lid. I've got 2 nice chunks of cherry wood. I'll get one straight on where the fire's burning and then one a little bit off to the side. Then we'll get our heat deflector back in. I'm going to get a couple of drip trays down on top of that. And then we'll get our cooking grate back on and then our beautiful brisket. And we'll also get a meat probe right in the thickest part there too. And then we'll shut our lid. And then our temperature's obviously dropped while we've had our lid open. But once we get back up to just below 225 Fahrenheit or 108 Celsius, we'll start shutting our vents down. All right, and now we're back up to just below where we want to be. I'm going to shut our intake vent down to around there, and then I'll give our smoker 10 minutes to see where it stabilizes off at. And if I need to increase temperature, all I need to do is open it up a little bit. If I need to decrease, I'll just shut it down a little bit more. But for now, I'm just going to leave it around there and we'll see where it sits at. So for the first 30 to 40 minutes of this cook, all I need to do is worry about fire management. I just want to make sure it's sitting nicely at that 225 Fahrenheit or 108 Celsius. Once I know it's sitting there nice and stable, I'm just going to simply leave this brisket overnight and we'll come back to check on it once we hit morning. All right, we are about 10.5 hours into this brisket cook. As you can see, our ambient temperature is around 111 Celsius, our internal's 92, and I've set my target for 95. And as we go to the trend chart, as you can see, that's when we put our brisket on. That's at about 10 o'clock last night. And then this red line is our ambient temperature. The orange is our internal. And then the green dotted line is just the target I set. So as you can see, that is pretty much just a straight line. This smoker hasn't moved. Right there, we're still at 1 AM. The internal temperature is just slowly climbing. So that just goes to show you can run the drum overnight without needing any accessories. Now let's have a look at this brisket. Now that is looking awesome. Got a really nice bark on there. That is feeling quite soft actually. So we'll just have a bit more of a probe around. A little bit of resistance there, and that part is around 89, 90 up in the thicker part of the point. A little bit of resistance around there. And then our flat here, sitting at around 93. So 10.5 hours in on this brisket. I'm just going to continue to leave it unwrapped because I reckon this is almost done. I reckon we've only got about 45 minutes, maybe an hour left. All right, and after around another hour, I reckon this is going to be done. So let's just have another quick probe around. This is the spot I was worried about before, but that is feeling much softer now. And right in there, we were at about 90 earlier, but now we're right around 93. It's just feeling really nice all over, so I'm happy to get this out. Now here's a tip so you don't burn your hands. I like to just put some cheap thermal gardening gloves on, and then I just put some plastic food safe gloves over the top of that. And then we are carefully going to get our brisket out and onto some foil. Now that's on top of 3 layers of good quality foil, and all I'm going to do now is just let our brisket steam off for a few minutes. That's going to stop our cooking process, and then we're going to cover it nice and tight in some foil, and then we'll let it rest. And now our brisket's had a few minutes to steam off. I've just got around 3/4 of a cup worth of the rendered fat I've saved from the drip trays underneath. I'm just going to pour that all over our brisket, and then we're going to wrap it up nice and tight. And now this is going to go for a nice long rest in the oven, which I've got set to around 60 degrees Celsius or 140 Fahrenheit. And after a good 5-hour rest, we can get this out onto our cutting bench, and then we can unwrap it. And now for the fun part, I'm just going to cut it straight in half. Look at that. That looks absolutely perfect. All right, and then slicing our brisket, we've got our flat. I'm just going to continue slicing it straight across like so. Let's test a piece out actually. Look at the bend on that. That just wants to fall apart, but it's holding up under its own weight, and I know that's just going to pull apart with ease. That fat has rendered beautifully. There's a great amount of moisture in the flat. This is going to be a good brisket. And look at that, even right to that very end piece of the flat, still nice and juicy. And then our point, I'm just going to take a few more slices off, just like so. And then I'm just going to turn it around. And as you can see, we've got the point muscle on this side. So I'm just going to take a few slices off like so. And that's where you get those beautiful fatty point slices, which are my favorite. And we're just going to keep slicing until we've got none of that point muscle left. And the little bit of point muscle that's left here, I'm just going to slice straight off like so. Just going to dig out the excess fat there. And then now we've got a few beautiful burnt ends. And then we'll spin back around and slice the rest of this flat the way we were slicing it before. And now it's time for a taste. All right, so we've just got a little piece off the flat. Pulls apart so easily. Oh, that's good. Such a beautiful flavour in that beef. I love that rub combination. Juicy, tender, full of flavour. Everything you want in a brisket. Now I always get asked, what do I do with all of this brisket? So I'm going to show you. So I've just divided up any leftover brisket into vacuum seal bags. And now I'm just going to go ahead and get these all vacuum sealed up. And now I've got smoked brisket whenever I want it. I can give this to family, friends, or use it in other recipes like tacos, nachos, pastas, pies, and more. And in the fridge, this will last up to a few weeks, or in the freezer, you'll get up to a year out of it. And then to reheat it, it's super simple. All you need to do is drop the Vac-Seal bag into some simmering water. From frozen, it'll take around half an hour to heat back through, or from thawed, around 15 minutes. So there you have it. There's how to smoke brisket in a drum smoker without losing any sleep. I hope you enjoyed the video. Give it a thumbs up if you did, subscribe to my channel. If you've got any questions, don't hesitate to ask them in the comments below. But for now, that's the end of the video. So thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next one.